My name is Ray Hiemstra, and I'm the Associate Director at Orange County Coastkeeper. So the Santa Ana River is located in Southern California in San Bernardino, Riverside, and Orange counties. It starts in San Bernardino County, rolls through Riverside County, and hits the Pacific Ocean in Orange County. The Santa Ana River flows for over 100 miles. From up, it's kind of merges as South Creek along Highway 38 in this San Bernardino National Forest down to the Pacific Coast, down between Huntington Beach, at the boundary between Huntington Beach and Newport Beach. Most of the effort on the Santa Ana River is focused in kind of the middle Santa Ana River, which is the San Bernardino and Riverside area, the very northern part of Orange County. That's where most of the vegetation and kind of the human wild interface is. So we just have 7 million people that live around the river. And this river was a lush, very productive river in its past. There were some massive floods in the 1930s, which really killed a couple hundred people and really made a big difference to society. And we put a straitjacket on the river at that time. If you looked at value, the greatest natural resource of the river is the water that it carries. So water is really important in Southern California and all of California. And the Santa Ana River is a water resource for all of the communities along it, especially Orange County, where the river is basically absorbed into an aquifer that we use for our drinking water. The habitat along the river is becoming increasingly valuable because as development goes along, there needs to be what's called mitigation. So if habitat is destroyed in one place, it needs to be restored in another. And the river is seen as one of those places where mitigation can occur along the riverbanks. So there are a number of mitigation projects and areas along the Santa Ana River. It's one of the things that is changing. So if you look at the way that the Santa Ana River, the way we build around it, the way we think about it now, it's pretty much ignored. When it was, as I mentioned, it was a big attention getter back in the 30s when it flooded and caused a lot of damage, killed a bunch of people. Since then, the efforts have been to restrain the river, and we've turned our backs on the river. If you go to a lot of places throughout the country, houses face the river, riverfront property is high value property, that type of thing. Here we turn our back on it, and we kind of ignore the river, and the houses face away, and government and to a large extent people have a tendency to pretend the river doesn't exist. Well, there's a lot of scientific work being done on the river. One of the things is that under the Clean Water Act, all waters in the United States are required to be fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. So when we have polluted waterways, and the Santa Ana unfortunately is polluted, then what happens is under regulations they have to be cleaned up. So without getting too technical, there are a number of requirements for cleaning up the water of the Santa Ana River and its tributaries. So millions of dollars is being expended in cleaning up that water and making sure that it's swimmable, drinkable, and fishable. And that's one of the things that we work on a lot, is helping to make sure that that water is cleaned up and that people are able to use it for those purposes. You should be able to jump in one of those concrete channels technically and be able to go safely swimming.
And then right now they don't allow that, right?
Well, you're not allowed to go in there. The flood control agencies don't allow, restrict access to there. There's different perceptions of whether that's legal or not, and that may be tested pretty soon. But that's one of the things that we need to deal with. Is there's a lot of people have grown up thinking, I can't go there. That's fenced off. This is polluted. It's horrible. It shouldn't be by law, and there's no reason for it to be. The abiotic factors that we're working with are primarily pollutants such as urban runoff, sediment from development, and then the actual changing of the course of the river from armoring and things like that. So all of these have an effect on the river and the habitat and river environment. So they're important things that we need to work on. For instance, the sedimentation is affecting some of the habitat for species. And along with the chemistry has things to do with not only wildlife species, but drinkability and also potential recreational uses. So these are all factors that we need to consider with the river. For instance, when you think of pollutants, people often think of chemical pollutants, things like that. Pollutants include sediment, things like that. So a perfect example is the sediment that has now started to build up in the river has covered up the rocks that were traditionally open, open to the water. And on the rocks grew algae, and there were fish, including the Santa Ana sucker, which is now endangered, that fed on that algae. So when you cover up the rocks, there's no algae, and you start running out of suckers, and that has an impact on the entire river, because native species are there for a reason. They're the ones that were adapted to there, and even though we may have other fish in the river, they're not as well adapted and don't have the same ecological benefits as a native species do. I know there's over 250 species that live in the Santa Ana River. And then there was a breakdown of how many of them. I think there's about 3 to 5 that are actually endangered. Some of the endangered species down there are the willow flycatcher, the Belding sparrow. So if you have areas where riparian habitat is taken away, for instance, the flycatchers like to live in willows. And if you go through and for flood control purposes, you're removing the willows from the river and the channel, then you're reducing habitat for those species. So what happens is we get into a situation where we are removing habitat from some places and replacing it in others. And while on balance that may look like we're keeping the same amount of habitat or even producing more, what happens is when you concentrate that habitat in one place, you end up with a problem of possible eradication of the species by a major disaster. For instance, right now, most of the Santa Ana suckers are concentrated in about a 1 mile stretch of the Santa Ana River, because that's the only part of the river that remains good habitat for them. If we happen to have an accident on a bridge above that area and chemicals or something spills into the river, you're going to wipe out the entire species in one shot, because that's where they're at. And what we're doing is taking and doing housing developments, for instance, in the foothills of Yorba Linda or other places, and replacing that with habitat behind Prado Dam in the Santa Ana River area. But it concentrates all those species in one area, and if there's some kind of illness or some other major disaster, it could really impact the species. We need all of our species out there, and when we get somewhere to where we're at a threatened or endangered species level, we really have to look at it as we failed, because we shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be there in the first place. Most of these species are endangered or threatened because of activities from humans, not because of things that just natural changes in their environment. The Santa Ana sucker is somewhat specific. It actually occurs also in the San Gabriel River, but those are the only 2 places that they occur. Willow flycatchers occur in other places also, but the problem is that we're wiping out their habitat in this area overall. So even though there are willow flycatchers, and there's nowhere near as many as there used to be, and it's primarily because their habitat's being destroyed. And they've gotten down to a point when they are on the threatened or endangered species list, then there's concerns about their being able to reproduce and maintain themselves, not just on the lowest level, but actually to recover and actually be a viable species. One of the things that we don't want to end up is a situation to where, and this happens all the time, to where we get down to where maybe we had 10% of the individuals that we had for some species, and people get used to that. It was like, well, when I was a kid, there were never any willow flycatchers. Well, yeah, that's because we wiped most of them out a long time ago. They used to be all over the place. This area used to have a lot of streams and a lot of riparian habitat, and most of it's gone, 90% plus. And that's why there's regulation that you pretty much can't remove riparian habitat anymore without replacing it at a greater value than what you remove it. So it's there. In fact, in the state, we have a zero loss policy for wetlands. So you can't take out 1 square foot of wetlands without replacing it. If you take out the willows, you don't have any more willow flycatchers. If you take out the algae-covered rocks, you're not going to have Santa Ana suckers. So there's a number of organizations that work on that, all the way from government agencies down to nonprofits like my own Orange County Coastkeeper. Uh, what they, the government agencies are generally working under requirements from legislation, like the Clean Water Act. So they need to take actions to remove pollution and make sure that the water quality is acceptable for use. And then you have special interest agencies. For instance, there's one called SAPA, the Santa Ana River Project Authority. What they do is they actually have a big pipe that they run under the Santa Ana River. They're very concerned about the Santa Ana River, not so much for the species value, but because, for instance, the way the river has been removing sediment and cutting down actually exposed their pipe in a number of areas. And if that pipe broke open, it would actually spill highly polluted water into the river, and not only wipe out the river, but wipe out the entire aquifer for Orange County, for 3 million residents. So they are very paranoid about the state of the river and the down cutting of the river that exposed their pipe, to the point that where if you drive along the 91 freeway now, you'll see some massive construction going on. And what that is they're actually moving that pipe out of the bottom of the Santa Ana River. They buried it at the bottom of the Santa Ana River about 30 years ago, thinking that was a nice safe place, that was, it was 20 foot under the river at that time. And the river has now exposed the pipe in many places. One boulder cracking that pipe would wipe out the entire aquifer for Orange County. So that's an example.
So what would happen if, say if one of these pipes were to burst, and then...
That can't happen. That can't happen. It would literally, that brine, it's a very salty, highly polluted water. It's actually treated water from Stringfellow acid pits, which is a Superfund site. If that was to break and get into the river, and a large amount of it would destroy an aquifer for 4 million people. It would wipe out 60% of the drinking water in Orange County.
Wow, that's
yeah,
insane.
it's a huge deal. That's why they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to move that pipe out of the river. And that's an example of, like I said, how fast the river is downcutting. And that's because we've changed its hydrology. The way the river is supposed to work is it's supposed to snake along. It's actually, the term is called meandering. And but instead of meandering along, we've kind of straightened it out. And when you increase velocity, then that gives it the power to pick up more sediment, and away it goes, and it's carving its way down. It would be an unbelievable disaster. So yeah, it's one of those things that simply you can't allow that to happen. I used to work, bottled water off the fire hydrant for a week and a half, and we got our water back up again. It's all drinkable water. Well, there's a lot of different factors. So we've got air quality issues. So you have aerial deposition into the river. When you clear riparian vegetation and channelize the river, then you remove riparian vegetation, which provides shade, cools the water. So you end up with water that's warmer than it would normally be. Doing those types of things changes the entire physical structure of the river. Everything from the current speed to the volume of water that's in the river. So right now our river is primarily controlled by, in the middle Santa Ana River, the majority of the water in the river is treated wastewater. So it's good quality as far as, it doesn't have a lot of bacterial contaminants or anything in it, but that's what it is. So if you look at that 6-inch deep water that's 20 foot wide running through Riverside, That is 90% treated wastewater. I would say the biggest plant issue in the Santa Ana River is the presence of Arundo donax, which is a giant cane. It looks a lot like bamboo, and it's an exotic plant. It uses huge amounts of water. It's practically indestructible, and we spend millions and millions of dollars eliminating Arundo simply because for the water value. What they found is you actually turn a profit by spending money to get rid of Arundo. You actually get that much more water that this stuff isn't sucking up when it's growing. To get rid of Arundo, to just to give you an idea of how tough some of these exotics can be, is you have to go in with a herbicide, poison it, and then dig it up and then burn it, because even a little piece the size of your pinky will regrow an entire plant, and it can grow up to a foot a day. It's an amazing weed that uses a tremendous amount of resources. So actually, the biggest issue in the Santa Ana River is less their endangered species. I think it's up in the upper watershed in San Bernardino. I think it's the woolly star. It's an endangered species that's up there. But invasive species are a huge problem, and that's a big part of the problem for our native species, is that they're being outcompeted by things like Arundo and other invasive species. People are the drivers for all of that. That plant wouldn't be here if it hadn't have been for people bringing it, along with the other exotics. And then just the way that we choose to live our lifestyle in our climate has major impacts. Landscaping is 60% of our water use in Southern California. So when anybody talks about a water shortage, the only water shortage is for your lawn. We have plenty of water in most places for people to drink and do all the things that we need to do. We're using massive amounts of water for landscaping that we don't need to use. Primarily the ongoing what we call urban slaughter. So it's you have the constant runoff of pollutants, whether it be from industry or residential streets or cars or everything like that. If you think about it, every car out there that's driving around, the tires are wearing down, the brake pads. So the tires have zinc, rubber, carbon. You have copper in the brake pads. You have oil. Your yard has fertilizers, pesticides, all of that type of stuff. Then industrial processes. Most of them are pretty clean. Because one of the first things that everybody goes after are the industrial sites. So most of them are pretty clean or in the process of cleaning up. So really what we're down to are what are called non-point sources. And the non-point sources are the ones that are the hardest to deal with. And that's everybody's lawn, everybody's car, everybody's people that hose down their driveway. And it's easy to think that you're just, my part doesn't really matter and it's only a few micrograms, but when you add it up to 7 million people, it's a lot. We're, doing these activities that are ended up polluting the river, which we then have to pay to clean up. So for every pesticide and fertilizer and everything that ends up in the river water, under law, that has to be fishable, swimmable, and drinkable. So we're spending millions and millions of dollars to clean up the very mess that we're putting in there. If we can just all work to not put that in there, then we're going to save ourselves a lot of money. Not only yards are wildly expensive. If you look at the maintenance costs for a grass lawn, it's one of the most expensive things that you can have. For instance, if you change over to something different, using not native plants, but more California-friendly type plants, drought-tolerant plants, they can still be pretty. You don't need to add pesticides. You don't need to use as much water, and that doesn't end up in the street, and you end up with a better river. And then we need to recognize the river and take it back as a resource for us. There's no reason why anybody in Riverside should have to drive 60 miles down to the beach when you go to a lot of places and they go to their river. We have a nice river, and we should be enjoying it for what it is, instead of spending all of our time on the 91 freeway trying to get down to a beach that people would prefer. Some people would prefer you go there because it's cheaper, so that they can so they don't have to do the effort to clean up the river. Well, so for instance, one estimate just for bacteria that we looked at was $30 billion if we were to clean up every tributary, every stream just in the Santa Ana River watershed for recreational use, like the law requires. The estimate was $30 billion. Now that was probably really high, but even if you take 1/10 of that, $3 billion is a lot of money. So our impacts to the river, just for us to meet the existing regulations, are really large. So, and we can take care of a lot of this issues just by not making sure that things don't end up in the river, trash, yard waste, all types of things like that. And so it's a big impact. And the river is a resource. I said it's our drinking water. One of the sadder but true things about the river is the county of San Bernardino and their Santa Ana River Plan listed the river as one of the functions of the river as something that takes their waste away. So for them, it's a resource to take it down to Riverside in Orange County. It's basically that's in writing. So and then you've got the city of Riverside, which has taken a different point of view, and it actually has a plan called Put the River Back in Riverside, and they're trying to realize this resource and encourage protection and use of the Santa Ana River. What we're really doing is paying for the past in a lot of ways. There's places where industries have dumped chemicals in the past, and that now those need to be cleaned up, and that's really expensive. So there's actually several lawsuits going on right now between the Orange County Water District and IT&T and Northrop Grumman that to clean up groundwater basins that they've polluted from past dumping at their locations. And what's happened is those companies weren't acknowledging what was going on. Orange County Water District identified the problem and started doing cleanup activities and is now suing those companies to recover the costs for that cleanup. So it gets you sooner or later. Like I said, primarily a lot of the stuff that's going on the river, are things that we're dealing with from our past activities. So in summary, what we've done to the Santa Ana River is channelize it to a certain extent, straighten it out, change its course, alter its habitat and overall ecosystem, and then we're putting a lot of chemicals and materials into it, whether it be sediment, metals, nutrients, bacteria, things like that. So we've done that over a number of years. We've kind of recognized that now that we've recognized that we've done that, and we've really turned the corner. And I think we're making progress. I know we're making progress towards reducing the amount of this stuff that goes into the river and starting to work on ideas and how we can restore the river. And this isn't just happening here. A lot of everybody's, I think, especially in this area, is familiar with kind of the renaissance of the LA River. We're lucky that we got a way better river than the LA River. I mean, they're really starting from a hole. Almost the entire river's channelized. Only 20% of our river is actually concrete bottom. So we have a river that's in much better shape in the first place, and we've got a lot to work with. It's just a matter of making the financial commitment to doing that, and it's a big financial commitment. When people recognize what they get out of the river, it's a lot easier to spend money on it. When if you don't even know what the river is or why it's there, then why would you spend $20 million on that? The reason you should care about the river is because if you end up with a unhealthy river, then you're not going to be able to water your lawn, and you're not going to be able to transport your waste or any of those other things, because, if nothing else, simply because of regulations. If things get bad enough, and that's happened in the past, actually in Ohio at one point in the 70s, we had a river catch on fire. That's how badly it was polluted. And what happens then is the regulations really come in on your personal actions. There are areas in the country where you're not allowed to apply grass fertilizers to your grass. Phosphorus fertilizers are restricted, where if you don't have the water, you're not going to have a lawn to water because you're not going to have the water for your lawn. And and there's laws regarding adding pollutants to a polluted river. So if it's so polluted, then you're no longer going to be able to discharge anything to the river. So those functions that it does are dependent on the fact of the river being healthy enough to sustain those functions. And it's simply impossible under the Clean Water Act and in the United States to decide that, well, we're just going to go ahead and let this thing die and become a cesspool. Not only, and then the public won't accept that either, because it becomes a problem for everybody. I would just like to, ask everyone to go down to the river at their local park and actually walk down to the banks and take a look. And take a look at the river, see what kind of wildlife is there, see what the river is actually like at a local park where you're able to access it. And I think you're going to be surprised, because the biggest problem we have is people don't recognize what our river is and what it can mean to us. So that would be my message, is for everybody to take that opportunity to go down and see the river. Even if you're just riding along a bike trail, you'd be surprised, even in the channelized sections, how many birds and things like that are there along the river. And needless to mention, all the, there's a lot of interesting people and other things going on down there. So the river's a fun and active and vibrant place. It's not a dead concrete channel, even though it can look like that when you're driving by on the freeway.